From the very beginning, her life had been surrounded by invisible chains, each link forged from carefully constructed lies. Her family spoke of duties, obligations, and limits that seemed ordinary at first, yet every restriction pressed upon her like a weight designed to bend her spirit. She was told where to go, what to wear, and even how to speak, as if each word she uttered might disrupt the delicate order they had built around her. Yet beneath the surface of these rules lingered a sinister purpose, one meant to conceal truths from her that others feared she might uncover. Every interaction, every whispered conversation, felt layered with deception. She noticed it in the way her siblings hesitated before answering questions, how her stepmother's smiles never quite reached her eyes, and how the village leader's praises were always tinged with caution, as though watching for some invisible fault. The environment itself seemed designed to confine her, both physically and mentally. Walls of her home and village streets that should have felt safe became boundaries of control, marking the edges of a cage she could not yet see. Yet she was not blind to the inconsistencies around her. The more she observed, the more she realized that the truth she had been fed was carefully crafted. Her father's words contradicted her mother's letters, stories repeated by neighbors shifted slightly with each retelling, and the tales of her ancestors were rewritten to serve the convenience of those in power. The people around her moved as if playing parts in a carefully choreographed performance, and she, unknowingly, was both the audience and the target. Even the smallest freedoms were illusions. When she asked for permission to visit the river or to attend the market, it was granted, but only within narrow limits, always monitored, always constrained. Every allowance came with invisible conditions, and every denial seemed to reinforce her feeling of helplessness. The cage was invisible yet undeniable, crafted not from iron or wood, but from lies that weighed more heavily on the mind than any physical barrier could. Despite this, she retained a quiet resilience, a persistent spark of curiosity and intuition. Something inside her resisted the narrative imposed upon her. When her siblings laughed at her mistakes or her stepmother scolded her for imagined faults, she noticed small cracks in their facade, hesitations, guilty glances, and the unintentional truths that slipped through their carefully maintained masks. These tiny glimpses hinted at a world beyond her confinement, a world of hidden knowledge and forgotten promises that had been kept from her. She understood, in the core of her being, that this cage was not meant merely to contain her. It was designed to prevent her from discovering something of immense importance. It was a prison not of metal, but of deceit, and it had taken years of subtle manipulation to keep her unaware of her own power, her own heritage, and the truths that could shatter the control of those who sought to dominate her. As she sat in the quiet of her room that evening, listening to the distant sounds of laughter and chatter beyond the walls, she felt a stirring within her, a whisper that spoke of secrets, of hidden keys, of truths that could not remain buried forever. The cage was formidable, but she knew, deep inside, that every lie also left a thread she could follow, a path that might lead her to freedom and the revelation of everything they had worked to hide. Even within the cage of deceit, subtle signs began to emerge, like cracks in a carefully painted wall. At first, they were almost imperceptible, a book slightly out of place, a whispered word caught at the edge of hearing, a fleeting glance that lingered too long before being dismissed. These small irregularities teased at the edges of her awareness, urging her to look closer, to question the reality that had been presented as absolute truth. Objects seemed to betray the secrets they were meant to conceal. A locket left carelessly on a shelf, a journal tucked behind others in the cabinet, a key that didn't fit any ordinary lock. Each anomaly was a clue. They whispered of hidden chambers, of things deliberately kept from her sight. Her intuition, sharpened by years of observation under duress, sensed the patterns forming. These weren't mistakes. They were threads intentionally placed or accidentally revealed, pointing toward a larger truth that had been denied to her. Conversations, too, became a source of revelation. Voices she thought she understood carried double meanings, half-spoken warnings, and subtle admissions. When her sister laughed nervously at a story, or her brother hesitated before answering a question, the discord between words and expression spoke louder than any statement could. She noticed how certain elders avoided eye contact, how some neighbors offered too eager advice, and how her stepmother's instructions seemed to twist and turn, never landing fully on a clear direction. The contradictions piled up, forming a mosaic of secrecy waiting to be deciphered. Even routine events seemed off, meals prepared with deliberate omissions, letters delivered late or mysteriously lost, rituals performed with unusual fervor or skipped entirely. It all suggested that her daily life was not as it appeared. The house, the village, and even the people she thought she knew were pieces in a carefully constructed illusion. Each discrepancy, no matter how small, hinted at a hidden layer, a truth that someone wanted to remain buried. She began to trust her instincts more than the explanations offered to her. Her mind, sharpened by necessity, connected the dots. A missing heirloom here, a hastily covered mark there, and whispers of her family's past that never aligned with the stories she had been told. The inconsistencies painted a picture too coherent to be mere coincidence. A single realization grew steadily in her chest. She was being kept from something vital, something that could change everything about the life she had been allowed to live. These hints, though subtle, gave her a sense of power amid confinement. Each observation strengthened her resolve and sharpened her focus. Though she remained trapped within a cage of lies, she was no longer passive. The threads of deception that once bound her now guided her, leading her toward questions she was determined to answer, truths she was determined to uncover, and a freedom that might yet be hers if she followed the signs carefully, courageously, and without faltering. Among the shadows of her confined life, a small, almost overlooked clue began to emerge. It was subtle, a mark scratched faintly into a wooden beam, a folded piece of paper tucked beneath a floorboard, and an object left carelessly in a corner. At first, she doubted the significance of any of these discoveries, suspecting them to be mere coincidences or remnants of neglect. But her instincts, honed through years of navigating deception and cruelty, whispered otherwise. Each anomaly carried intention, a sign meant to be found by the one observant enough to notice it. The object itself was unassuming, ordinary in the hands of someone who did not understand its importance. A small key wrought from iron, worn with age, and engraved with symbols she faintly recognized from stories of her family's past. It did not resemble any of the household locks, and its purpose was initially a mystery. Yet, as her fingers traced its contours, a warmth seemed to pulse through it, as if it acknowledged her presence. She felt an inexplicable connection, a subtle hum of energy, and a whispering certainty that this key was meant for her, and her alone. Next to it lay a tattered letter, the ink faded and smudged by time. Its words, though fragmented, hinted at a secret kept through generations, a safeguard of truth, a hidden chamber, and a power long denied to those who did not deserve it. The letter spoke in riddles, but in combination with the key, it suggested a path, one that could unravel the lies imprisoning her and expose the very foundation upon which her oppressor's authority rested. The key was not just metal, it was a symbol, a tangible piece of destiny, waiting to unlock what had been deliberately concealed. Her mind raced as she considered the implications. Whoever had hidden the key knew the consequences of its discovery. It was never meant to fall into the wrong hands. Yet here it was, in her grasp, signaling a shift in power she had never thought possible. With this key she could access the truth, reclaim her autonomy, and confront the lies that had bound her. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, but instead of fear she felt resolve. She had been patient, observant, and silent. Now she held the instrument that could turn her endurance into liberation. She examined the key further, noticing the inscriptions that corresponded to symbols she had seen in old family records and whispered tales from elders. Each marking hinted at a step, a process, a ritual that would reveal the hidden reality. She realized that understanding the key's purpose required more than curiosity. It demanded intelligence, careful planning, and courage. Every twist of metal and subtle engraving was a piece of a larger puzzle, one that, if solved, would dismantle the power structure that had held her captive for so long. The key, though small, represented a monumental shift. In it, she saw possibility, the chance to reclaim not only her own freedom but the truth that had been suppressed for generations. The cage that had kept her silent and powerless trembled, not from force, but from the promise of revelation. She understood that the next steps she took would be pivotal, that she must act with precision and determination. And as she held it close, she felt an awakening of strength, a surge of clarity, and a whisper of destiny guiding her toward the truth she had been denied for so long. Amid the shadows of her constrained life, she began to notice small irregularities, details overlooked by others. A faint mark scratched into the floorboard, a folded piece of parchment tucked behind a forgotten book, and an old trinket left in a corner where it didn't belong. All of them seemed insignificant at first. Yet something in her gut insisted that these were not random, that each held purpose beyond the surface of neglect. Her sharp eyes and keen intuition, honed from years of navigating lies and deception, recognized intention. The object that caught her attention was unassuming, a small iron key, worn smooth by time, engraved with symbols she faintly remembered from the stories her mother once whispered. At first glance, it seemed useless, an old trinket with no connection to the locks around her. But when she held it in her hand, warmth seeped through her fingers, as if the key acknowledged her presence, responding to the one person meant to find it. A quiet shiver ran through her, a mixture of fear and anticipation. This key, she realized, was not merely metal. It was a message, a guide, a fragment of destiny left deliberately for her to uncover. Next to the key lay a faded letter, the ink smudged and brittle. Its words were fragmented, yet each carried weight, a warning, a direction, and a hint of the hidden truths her oppressors had worked to bury. The letter spoke of a chamber long concealed, and of knowledge suppressed through generations. It hinted at a power that could topple the structures of control imposed upon her. As she pieced the words together, the key and the message merged in her mind. This object was the instrument of revelation, the first tangible step toward dismantling the lies that had caged her. Her pulse quickened as she considered the possibilities. Whoever had hidden the key had understood the consequences of its discovery. It was never meant for the wrong hands. Yet here it was, resting in her palm, as if destiny itself had guided her to it. The key was a chance not just for freedom but for truth, a way to reclaim the reality that had been stolen from her. Every line on the letter, every etching on the key, pointed toward a path she had been too cautious to see before, a route that could expose the deceit surrounding her. She traced the intricate symbols on the key, realizing they matched patterns she had glimpsed in old family records and in stories whispered by the village elders. Each marking represented a step, a hidden passage, a safeguard designed to reveal what had been concealed. Understanding the key's full purpose required intelligence, patience, and courage, qualities she had cultivated in silence. She recognized that the small piece of metal held the power to shift her world, to challenge the structures that had kept her oppressed for so long. Clutching the key tightly, a surge of determination coursed through her. She understood the gravity of what she had found. This was not simply a tool, it was a symbol of hope, a beacon guiding her toward truth, and a means to unravel the web of lies that had trapped her. The cage of deceit around her trembled, not from physical force, but from the promise of revelation. For the first time in years, she felt the awakening of strength within her, the clarity of purpose, and the undeniable pull of destiny. The key had found its rightful holder, and with it her path to liberation and justice began. Holding the key tightly in her hand, she felt a mixture of fear and resolve. She had sensed the lies that surrounded her, the invisible threads tying her life into a web of deceit, but she had never understood their full depth. Tonight, however, the key seemed to hum with purpose, guiding her steps as she navigated the hidden corners of her home and the forgotten recesses of memory. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow cast by the flickering lamplight seemed to whisper encouragement, urging her to continue. Her investigation began quietly, almost imperceptibly. She retraced her steps from years ago, noting the inconsistencies she had long ignored, the missing letters, the sudden disappearances of relatives, the hushed conversations she had stumbled upon as a child. Each small anomaly had seemed trivial at the time, but now, in the light of the key's revelation, they formed a coherent pattern. The household she had grown up in was not merely dysfunctional or careless. It had been meticulously orchestrated to conceal something far more sinister. Following the patterns, she discovered a concealed drawer in her late mother's writing desk, cleverly hidden behind a false panel. With trembling hands she inserted the key, and the lock clicked open as though it had been waiting decades for her touch. Inside were documents, letters, and ledgers meticulously cataloging events, names, and transactions that revealed the truth her family had spent years hiding. As she pored over the papers, her heart raced. The lies were deliberate, calculated, and designed to protect someone's gain at the cost of justice. There were references to a stolen inheritance, falsified deeds, and even threats disguised as familial advice. She realized that her mother's warnings, the cryptic stories told to her in whispers, and the small, protective actions of a few loyal allies had all been attempts to shield her from the worst of the betrayal. Her family had created a perfect illusion, one that made her doubt her own memory, her own worth, and her own intuition. Yet the key had not only opened the drawer, it had unlocked her understanding. She saw, in meticulous detail, how her stepmother had manipulated events, how her brother had been complicit in reinforcing falsehoods, and how outsiders, perhaps distant relatives or unscrupulous advisors, had aided in the concealment. The documents even revealed a secret transaction, an agreement that had given away part of her birthright to people she had never met, ensuring that the household's power remained concentrated in the hands of the deceitful. But it was not just the betrayal that struck her, it was the sheer audacity of the lies. Every lie had been layered, a story within a story, meant to confuse and control her. She realized that the humiliation, the restrictions, and even the silences she had endured were not merely acts of cruelty, they were strategic moves in a larger game she had been unaware of. The key had illuminated a reality she could scarcely have imagined. Her entire life had been shaped around a carefully maintained illusion. Despite the shock, she felt no despair. Instead, a spark of determination ignited within her. The revelation was not merely a burden, it was a call to action. Now that she understood the full extent of the deception, she could begin to dismantle it. The lies that had imprisoned her in silence and doubt were now exposed to her perception, and with the key in her hand, she held both a symbol and a tool of empowerment. Her mind raced with possibilities. How could she reclaim what had been stolen? Who could she trust among the few allies who had remained faithful? And most importantly, how could she use this knowledge to protect others from the same fate? The key had opened more than a lock. It had opened her eyes to the magnitude of the betrayal, the depth of the conspiracy, and the power she had always possessed but had been denied the opportunity to wield. As the first hints of dawn crept through the windows, she tucked the documents safely into her cloak and stepped back, her resolve firm. The lies could no longer hold sway over her. The truth was now in her hands, fragile but undeniable. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger and resistance, but for the first time she saw clearly. The cage of deceit had cracks and she was ready to pry them wide open. With the key guiding her, she was no longer the passive observer. She was the arbiter of truth, poised to bring fire down on the web of lies that had held her captive for so long. She moved cautiously through the familiar corridors, her steps muffled against the worn wooden floors. The papers she had uncovered in the hidden drawer were now folded neatly inside her cloak, their weight not just physical but symbolic of the truths she now carried. She knew the moment she stepped outside the house that every eye could be a threat, every glance might hide suspicion or malice. Yet amidst the looming danger, a sense of cautious hope stirred within her. It was then she felt the presence of someone who understood. At first she saw nothing, just shadows cast by flickering lamplight, but the subtle shift of air, the almost imperceptible alignment of footsteps with her own, told her she was not alone. She had long learned to trust her instincts, and now they screamed that she was being watched, not in a threatening way but with awareness, with recognition. The figure finally emerged from the shadows. An elder, one whose eyes had held wisdom longer than she could remember. This was someone who had seen generations rise and fall, someone who knew the power of secrets and, more importantly, who understood the peril of a truth that remained hidden for too long. His presence was reassuring yet formidable, carrying the weight of knowledge without a hint of arrogance. "You've seen it," he said softly, not as a question but as acknowledgement. His voice was low, steady, and carried an authority that demanded attention without intimidation. She nodded, feeling a surge of relief mixed with renewed determination. She had feared that possessing the hidden truth alone would make her vulnerable, that acting without guidance might lead to disaster. Now she realized she had found the ally who could teach her how to wield it wisely. They retreated to a quieter part of the compound, away from prying eyes and ears. The elder's gaze was intense yet kind, examining her with the scrutiny of someone who had witnessed both innocence and cunning in equal measure. "The knowledge you hold is dangerous," he said, his words deliberate. "It can unravel lives, shift power, and ignite consequences you cannot yet foresee. But danger is not reason to hide. It is reason to act wisely." She listened intently as he spoke, absorbing every nuance. He outlined the scope of the conspiracy she had uncovered, the lies meticulously layered over years, the alliances of convenience that had kept the truth suppressed, and the hidden motives of those she had trusted. His insight was precise, revealing aspects of the plot she had not anticipated, details that were invisible to her even after hours of careful study. "What I will show you," the elder continued, "is not just how to navigate this web of deceit, but how to turn the knowledge to your advantage without endangering yourself or those you care about. Timing, discretion, and strategy are as important as courage." He paused, letting his words sink in. Many would act recklessly, believing that revelation alone is enough to correct injustice. But power, even in truth, can be fatal if wielded without guidance. He guided her through practical steps: how to observe without being observed, how to communicate with allies in secrecy, and how to anticipate the reactions of those who had perpetuated the lies. Each instruction was layered with subtle wisdom, small actions that could have enormous impact, decisions that required patience, composure, and foresight. She realized that her power was not merely in what she now knew, but in how she chose to use that knowledge. Over time, the elder also shared lessons about discernment. Not everyone who smiles at you is a friend, and not every silence is surrender. The people who surround you will react in ways you cannot predict. Your strength lies in understanding both the seen and the unseen, in reading the spaces between words and the pauses between actions. She began to see her previous observations in a new light. The subtle signs she had noticed in her home, the slight hesitation of certain relatives, the whispered warnings, all became pieces of a puzzle she could now assemble with clarity. The elder's guidance transformed her fear into strategy, her uncertainty into calculated action. Yet it was not just about tactics. The elder also nurtured her confidence, reminding her of her inherent worth and the justice of her cause. "You are the rightful custodian of this truth," he said. "It does not belong to those who built their power on lies. Every step you take in honesty and courage strengthens the foundation on which justice will stand." In the following days she practiced what she had learned, moving with intent and awareness, testing her ability to act under scrutiny, observing the household and its hidden networks. The elder remained a discreet presence, guiding without interference, allowing her to grow into the role that the truth demanded of her. She began to understand that the ally's value was not just in knowledge but in perspective. With him, she could anticipate dangers, recognize opportunities, and act with precision. The secrets she held were potent, yes, but with guidance, they became instruments of empowerment rather than weapons of reckless destruction. By the time she was ready to confront the conspirators, she felt prepared not only with strategy but with wisdom and composure. The elder's mentorship had turned her fear into focus, her uncertainty into clarity, and her solitary strength into a coordinated force. The truth she had uncovered was no longer a solitary burden, it was a legacy she could defend and wield responsibly. As they parted that night, the elder placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Remember," he whispered, "the path of truth is often dangerous, but it is never without purpose. Move carefully, act decisively, and trust in the guidance that brought you here." She nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility but also a newfound confidence. She was no longer alone. With an ally who knew the stakes, she was ready to step into the fire of revelation and claim the justice that had long been denied. The night was quiet, yet charged with tension. She sat in the dimly lit room, the papers and evidence she had gathered spread out before her like a map of hidden battles. Each letter, object, and note represented a fragment of the intricate web of deceit she had been ensnared in for so long. The weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders, yet the clarity of purpose steadied her heart. This was no longer merely about survival, it was about restoring justice and reclaiming what had been denied to her. She reviewed every detail meticulously, tracing the lies back to their source. Every falsehood uttered, every manipulated account, every misrepresented truth was a thread in a tapestry her oppressors had woven to bind her. But now, with the guidance of her ally, she could see the flaws in their construction. The inconsistencies were subtle, but they existed, and they were her leverage. Her strategy was simple in principle but complex in execution. Timing, precision, and awareness were paramount. She could not confront them recklessly, they were cunning, experienced in deceit, and quick to manipulate appearances. She needed to ensure that when the lies were revealed, there would be no room for denial. Every observer, every witness had to perceive the truth simultaneously, leaving no gaps for argument or excuse. She practiced how she would present the evidence, how she would speak, and when she would act. The arrangement of the documents, the placement of witnesses, and even the tone of her voice were considered carefully. It was a choreography of revelation, designed to expose the full extent of the deceit in a single, undeniable moment. She knew that hesitation or misstep could allow them to twist the story back in their favor. While planning the confrontation, she also accounted for allies. The elder who had guided her, and others she had discreetly observed or earned the trust of, would be positioned strategically. Their presence would support her credibility and ensure that the truth could not be dismissed. She considered who among the household and the village could be swayed by evidence alone and who might need careful preparation to witness the exposure without bias. Her mind also mapped possible reactions from her oppressors. Fear, anger, deflection, or manipulation could all surface. She prepared counters for each potential tactic, rehearsing responses that were calm, precise, and unassailable. Every move she made would need to anticipate the reactions of others, ensuring that she maintained control of the narrative while allowing the truth to speak for itself. The personal dimension of the confrontation weighed heavily on her. This was not just about justice, it was about reclaiming dignity, restoring balance, and asserting the truth of her life. She allowed herself a moment of reflection, remembering the days of humiliation, the whispers of lies, and the chains of deceit. Those memories fueled her resolve, reminding her why careful preparation was vital. Finally, she considered the aftermath. Revealing the truth would shift power, realign loyalties, and dismantle the foundation her oppressors had built. She needed to ensure that the revelation was comprehensive, leaving no aspect of the deception unchallenged. The moment would be decisive, and the impact would echo far beyond the immediate circle. By the time she rose from her preparations, her plan was clear, her resolve unwavering, and her awareness sharpened. Every detail had been considered, every contingency accounted for, and every ally positioned. The confrontation would not be impulsive, it would be a calculated strike of justice, the culmination of patience, observation, and intelligence. She was ready. The cage of lies would be shattered, and the truth, undeniable and radiant, would finally prevail. The day she had meticulously prepared for arrived with a quiet intensity, the air thick with anticipation and a subtle tension that seemed to vibrate through every corner of the household. She stepped into the room with measured calm, her posture composed, her gaze steady. Every eye turned toward her, expecting nothing more than the usual submissive presence they had conditioned her to display. Yet within her, a storm had been brewing for months, forged from patient observation, careful planning, and the relentless pursuit of truth. She began methodically, laying out the evidence she had gathered. Documents, objects, and witness accounts were presented with precision. Each piece was a key unlocking a fragment of the elaborate web of deceit spun by her oppressors. As she spoke, the lies they had nurtured over years began to crumble under the weight of undeniable facts. Every whispered manipulation, every act of coercion, and every false narrative was exposed, stripped bare for all to see. The reactions were immediate and intense. Faces drained of color, eyes widened in disbelief, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Her brother, stepmother, or any conspirators present froze, the facade of control they had cultivated shattering in an instant. Their carefully constructed narratives could not withstand the precision of her revelations. The truth she unleashed was not merely a collection of facts, it was a force, unstoppable, illuminating every shadow where deception had lurked. As she continued, she revealed the depth of the betrayals, the stolen inheritance, the hidden manipulations, the deliberate attempts to suppress her identity or rights. Every act intended to diminish her authority, confidence, and rightful place was laid bare. Those who had stood silent or complicit could no longer deny what they had witnessed. Even those who had believed in the oppressor's versions of events were forced to confront reality. The figurative fire of truth began to spread. Arguments, excuses, and feeble denials faltered under the weight of evidence. The oppressive structures that had confined her, both literal and figurative, crumbled as witnesses absorbed the scope of the deception. Her courage, patience, and intellect had transformed what once seemed impossible into an undeniable revelation. With every word, the power dynamics shifted. Those who had relied on lies for authority now stood exposed, vulnerable, and impotent. Her voice, steady and commanding, carried not only the truth but the authority born of righteousness and meticulous preparation. The allies she had silently positioned revealed themselves, corroborating her findings and reinforcing her credibility. Their presence ensured that no aspect of the revelation could be dismissed or twisted. The household, once a theater of oppression, became a chamber of reckoning where justice unfolded in real time. She also addressed the larger implications of the exposure, connecting each act of deceit to the harm it had caused, not just to her but to the broader community or village. The ramifications were immense, reverberating beyond the confines of her immediate oppressors. The revelations prompted reflection, accountability, and a re-evaluation of loyalties, forcing even bystanders to consider the consequences of silence and complicity. As the confrontation reached its climax, the conspirators' attempts to regain control only magnified their failure. Every plea, every justification, every feigned ignorance was met with the unyielding evidence she had so carefully assembled. The figurative fire blazed brighter, consuming the power they had wielded and leaving the truth illuminated in its wake. Finally, silence settled over the room, not a silence of resignation, but one of stunned recognition. The truth had been fully unleashed and it was inescapable. No act of denial, manipulation, or intimidation could undo the revelation. The power of her patience, observation, and courage had transformed the landscape entirely. The household, the village, and even the wider community could now witness justice manifested in a tangible, undeniable form. She stepped back, letting the impact of her revelation settle naturally among those present. Her oppressors were unmasked, the chains of deceit broken, and the foundation of lies reduced to ashes. The fire she had brought forth was not one of destruction for its own sake, but of illumination, cleansing, and restoration. It burned away the falsehoods and left a clear path for justice, dignity, and rightful authority to prevail. The room, once a cage of lies, had been transformed into a crucible of truth. She had harnessed patience, intellect, and courage to ignite a fire that could not be extinguished. Every observer, from the complicit to the curious, understood that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The truth she had unleashed was alive, radiant, and uncontainable, an enduring testament to resilience, wisdom, and the courage to confront deception head-on. The moment she had been preparing for arrived with a tension so thick it seemed to press against every wall of the household. She entered the room quietly, deliberately, her steps measured, her gaze steady, and her demeanor calm. Those who had long assumed her submission, her oppressors, her enablers, and even the curious villagers, watched with expectations of compliance. They believed that she would once again bow, remain silent, and accept the rules of the cage they had constructed around her life. What they did not know was that months of careful observation, secret investigation, and silent endurance had been preparing her for this exact hour. She began methodically, producing the evidence she had accumulated in secret. Documents, hidden letters, objects, and corroborating testimonies from those who had witnessed the subtle manipulations but feared speaking out. Each item, each piece of truth she revealed, cut through the layers of deceit that had been woven over years. Every lie her oppressors had cultivated, the fabricated stories, the hidden betrayals, the misrepresentations intended to suppress her, was now unmasked before all present. The weight of deception that had held power for so long began to crumble under the undeniable proof she presented. The reactions were immediate and visceral. Faces turned pale, eyes widened in shock, and whispered mutterings spread through the crowd like wildfire. Her brother, stepmother, or whoever had orchestrated her confinement froze, their confidence eroding with each new revelation. They had believed themselves untouchable, their carefully constructed narratives secure. Yet here she was, unflinching and precise, dismantling their illusions piece by piece. Their attempts to manipulate perception were powerless against the clarity of truth laid bare before witnesses. As she continued, she revealed the scope of their deceit, the theft of inheritance, the suppression of her identity, the deliberate acts meant to make her powerless. The depth of their betrayal stunned even the onlookers who had previously trusted them. Lies that had gone unquestioned for years were suddenly seen for what they were, tools of oppression and control, wielded to shape a false reality. Each revelation not only vindicated her but also began to shift the balance of power in the room. The figurative fire of truth spread rapidly. The lies that had confined her and manipulated those around her ignited into visible chaos, and the conspirators' attempts to regain control only highlighted their vulnerability. Witnesses who had been silent or fearful now had no choice but to confront reality. They saw the careful preparation, the courage, and the unwavering focus with which she dismantled every falsehood. What had been invisible, whispered, or hidden was now undeniable. The fire did not consume for destruction alone. It illuminated, revealing the reality that had long been obscured. Her voice, steady and authoritative, carried the weight of both indignation and clarity. Each word resonated, drawing attention to facts that could no longer be ignored. Allies she had quietly cultivated corroborated her evidence, adding legitimacy to the revelations and preventing any dismissal or counterclaim. The household, once a theater of fear and manipulation, became a crucible where the truth reshaped relationships, power, and understanding. She also framed the larger consequences of the lies, the harm caused to the community, the ways trust had been eroded, and the chain reactions of pain resulting from hidden deceit. Observers were forced to reckon not only with the personal betrayals she endured but also with the ethical and social impact of the conspiracy. The full scope of wrongdoing was revealed, and no participant could feign ignorance. Finally, the conspirators' last defenses crumbled. Every argument, every attempt at justification, and every feigned confusion fell flat under the weight of proof. The fire blazed brighter, consuming the false power they had relied upon. The cage of deceit they had built around her, both literal and figurative, was now shattered, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. Silence eventually fell, but it was not the silence of submission. It was the silence of awe, recognition, and the inevitability of justice. The truth had been unleashed, unstoppable and irreversible. She had turned patience, intelligence, and courage into a force that no lie could contain. The power of her oppressors, built upon deception and fear, was undone, and her rightful place restored. The household, the village, or even the wider community had witnessed a reckoning that would ripple for generations. In that moment, the figurative fire she had ignited was more than a symbol of confrontation. It was a manifestation of resilience, strategy, and the enduring power of truth. The lies that had sought to define her life were reduced to ash, and from them emerged clarity, justice, and the undeniable presence of her strength. The stage had been set, the truth unleashed, and the foundation of deceit forever shaken. The aftermath of the truth's revelation was swift and unforgiving. Those who had spent years weaving lies and manipulating perceptions suddenly found themselves exposed in the harsh light of clarity. The household that had once operated under the careful orchestration of deceit became a scene of chaos and disbelief. Faces that had once held the confidence of control were now pale with fear, and every gesture seemed forced, as though the very air around them weighed heavily with the knowledge that their power had vanished. Her oppressors, once untouchable in their authority, were now scrutinized by witnesses who had long been kept in the dark. Every whispered manipulation, every concealed act of betrayal was brought to the surface. The villagers, relatives, and bystanders who had been passive observers of the household dynamics began to confront the reality of what had been hidden from them. Questions were asked, murmurs turned to loud exclamations, and the web of lies that had shielded the deceivers began to unravel under the collective gaze. The consequences were immediate. Their attempts to regain control were futile because the foundation of their authority, the lies they had so meticulously constructed, was no longer intact. The people who had once obeyed or feared them now saw them as vulnerable, fallible, and untrustworthy. Decisions that had been made in secrecy, manipulations meant to suppress dissent, and actions designed to maintain dominance were all laid bare, leaving the deceivers scrambling to justify themselves. Every excuse faltered under scrutiny, every defense collapsed beneath the weight of undeniable evidence. Justice, long delayed, began to take its first tangible steps. The community, empowered by the revelation, acted swiftly to ensure accountability. Property that had been withheld, reputations that had been tarnished, and decisions made under false pretenses were all subject to review. Elders, leaders, and witnesses collaborated to right the wrongs, and the deceivers found themselves stripped of influence, credibility, and the means to manipulate further. They were no longer masters of their domain. The very people they had sought to control now held the authority to determine their fate. Her role in the reckoning was both central and catalytic. By exposing the lies with meticulous preparation and undeniable proof, she had created the conditions for justice to unfold naturally. She did not need to wield force or violence. The power of truth, coupled with strategic patience and courage, was sufficient to dismantle the network of deception. Observers saw her not only as a victim avenged but as a figure of wisdom, resilience, and moral authority. Even as the immediate reckoning played out, there was a deeper impact. Relationships were reassessed, trust recalibrated, and the values of honesty, integrity, and vigilance were reinforced across the household and community. The deceiver's fall became a cautionary tale, reminding everyone that falsehoods, no matter how cleverly hidden, cannot withstand scrutiny forever. In the midst of the chaos, she remained composed, her dignity intact. The fire she had ignited with the unveiling of truth continued to burn, a steady reminder that patience, intelligence, and courage are potent tools against oppression. The reckoning had begun, and while the deceivers faced the immediate consequences of their actions, the ripples of justice were only starting to spread. Her triumph was not only personal but communal, a transformation that restored balance and set a precedent for accountability. With the deceivers unmasked and justice beginning to take hold, she moved deliberately to restore what had been taken from her and to repair the damage done to her life and reputation. Each step she took was measured, deliberate, and infused with the lessons learned during her long ordeal. Where once fear and oppression had dictated her actions, now courage and clarity guided every decision. She reclaimed her rightful place within the household and the broader community, not through brute force but through the undeniable authority of truth. The first act of restoration was deeply personal. She addressed the wrongs done to her directly, confronting those who had sought to manipulate and suppress her. Their schemes were no longer hidden behind veils of deception. The evidence she had gathered, the allies she had rallied, and the revelations she had orchestrated left no room for denial. Each acknowledgement, whether reluctant or forced, was a step toward restoring her dignity. Her voice, once suppressed by lies, now carried weight, respect, and an unassailable authority. The community, witnessing the turn of events, responded with admiration and support. People who had previously been passive or fearful now recognized the strength of integrity and perseverance. Her actions became a beacon, showing that patience, intelligence, and resilience could overcome even the most entrenched deceit. Stories of her courage began circulating, inspiring not only those who had suffered under similar circumstances but also younger generations who learned that silence and passivity were not the only options when confronted with injustice. Reclaiming her position also involved practical measures. Inheritance, property, or responsibilities that had been wrongfully withheld were restored. She ensured that these were used wisely and fairly, demonstrating that power and authority, when grounded in truth and justice, could serve the collective good rather than personal gain. This careful stewardship reinforced the idea that restoration was not simply about regaining what was lost but about building a foundation for future stability and fairness. Her courage inspired others to act with integrity as well. Those who had been complicit in deceit, either actively or passively, were encouraged to make amends. Relationships that had been strained or fractured by lies began to heal as accountability took root. Forgiveness, tempered by understanding and vigilance, allowed the community to move forward without leaving bitterness or resentment to fester. In this way, her restoration became not only a personal victory but a catalyst for broader communal renewal. As she moved through these days of rebuilding, she also reflected on the deeper lessons of her experience. She realized that honor was not simply a matter of social recognition or material possessions. It was the result of steadfastness in the face of adversity, clarity of purpose, and the courage to confront truth no matter how painful or risky. By holding fast to these principles, she not only restored her own life but also reaffirmed the values that would guide her community for generations to come. The deceivers, stripped of their influence, were compelled to acknowledge the consequences of their actions. Yet her approach was neither vindictive nor petty. She understood that true restoration involved balance. The focus remained on rebuilding, on education, and on ensuring that the systems which allowed deceit to flourish were corrected. Her leadership emphasized transparency, fairness, and respect, setting a precedent that would endure long after the immediate events had passed. In every interaction, she embodied the strength that comes from surviving betrayal and oppression. Her courage was quiet yet undeniable, her wisdom evident in decisions that strengthened both her own standing and the collective trust of the community. By reclaiming her honor, she sent a clear message. Oppression and deceit may attempt to cage the innocent, but resilience, intelligence, and integrity can restore not only individual dignity but also communal balance. By the time the restoration was fully acknowledged, her story had become emblematic of hope and endurance. Villagers spoke of her perseverance with reverence, recounting the tale as a lesson in courage and strategic action. Children were told her story to learn the importance of vigilance and moral strength. Her legacy, though grounded in the events of her own life, extended far beyond, serving as a model of how one could confront falsehood, restore justice, and emerge stronger for the challenges faced. The restoration of honor was complete, not as a fleeting triumph but as a lasting transformation. Through wisdom, courage, and steadfast determination, she turned a life once constrained by lies and oppression into one marked by respect, balance, and enduring legacy. Her victory was not only hers but the community's, a reaffirmation that truth and integrity, once embraced and acted upon, have the power to rebuild what deceit sought to destroy.